Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. And so with that said, let's get into the Georgia side of things, because Georgia, I think you can argue, right up there with maybe A&M, maybe Clemson. I think Georgia was maybe the most impressive team on Saturday, and I bring them up after the Alabama game because, as I've said a couple times, this coming Saturday, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 Central, Georgia at Bama. So if you want to feel for right away how good these two teams are relative to everybody else, this is it on Saturday, because these are two of the three best teams that have played so far this season, obviously with Clemson being the other one. And when I look at Georgia, I got to tell you, man, listen, I have been critical of Kirby Smart. I just think in many ways he's been a fraud, a phony, a fake, not so much in what he is and what he's done, but I was always kind of out on Kirby Smart after the situation where they lost to Alabama in the SEC title game and claimed they still deserved a playoff spot. That's when I was out on Kirby Smart. That was obviously the game where they had the Justin Fields fake punt, and it was just a disaster, and they blew a second straight double-digit lead. But I got to tell you this. Kirby Smart has this team and this program, I think, playing as well as they have since he got to Athens 4 seasons ago. And I think it is reflected in what happened on Saturday. Because I'm guessing most of you saw the game, but for those of you who didn't, Tennessee comes in 2-0 off a dominant win over Missouri, and Georgia just manhandled them. The final score was 44-21, but I don't think 44-21 is reflective of what this game was like. Because if you watch the game, Tennessee, of their 3 scoring drives to total 21 points, of the 3 of them, the first one came on a scoop and score in which Stetson Bennett fumbled the ball on the 9-yard line, returned for a touchdown by Tennessee. And then the second touchdown drive was a one-play drive when Kirby Smart went for it on 4th and 1 at his own 36-yard line. So it's a turnover on downs, 1 play later, touchdown for Tennessee. And so I bring it up to say that while the final score was still a 23-point margin of victory for Georgia, the reality is it was actually much worse, because 14 of the 21 points basically came off Georgia turnovers, one on a turnover on downs in their own territory, and the other one on an actual turnover. But the rest of the game, they totally dominated. Tennessee, which again looked really good 2 Saturdays ago against Missouri, 215 yards of total offense, 214 yards of total offense, -1 yards rushing. They didn't get positive yardage in the rushing game. Now, I know that's a little bit deceiving because Jarrett Garantano took a bunch of sacks and fumbled the ball and did all that sorts of stuff, but 214 yards of total offense against a good Tennessee team. And on top of that, it's what I just said a minute ago. 3 turnovers forced in the game, 2 on Jarrett Garantano, and they just made Jarrett Garantano's life a living hell. Jarrett Garantano, of course, is the Tennessee quarterback. And what I would say is that while, again, I think I would argue I have been maybe the most critical person of Kirby Smart in the national media, this might be Georgia's year, guys. This might be Georgia's year. Because, first of all, in a sport where essentially no one plays any defense at all anymore, Georgia's defense is awesome. They are awesome. On the season, they actually rank 2nd in college football in total defense. And I think it's important to note 2 things on that. First of all, the only team ranked ahead of them is Houston, which has played a grand total of 1 game. So essentially Georgia has the best defense in college football. That's 1. And 2, it's not as though they've played chopped liver. I mean, Auburn, say what you want about them, they're half decent. To hold them to 6 points, pretty darn impressive. To hold Tennessee to 21 points, but you look at the yardage, 214 yards, I think that's a reflection of how good this Georgia team is and how balanced they are. And I do think, understandably, The question going forward is going to be really what it's been with Georgia the last couple years. Are they going to get enough play at quarterback for the defense and running game to do the rest? They're kind of Georgia, essentially what Alabama was 6, 7, 8 years ago. And I know that Georgia, for a Georgia fan that's listening, you've opened up the offense and it's different with Todd Monken, the new offensive coordinator. I get that. And I do think, to Georgia's credit, I do think they opened things up a little bit in the second half when they got that lead yesterday against Tennessee. But I would also say that from what I have seen, I actually do think they are balanced enough to compete for a national championship and to potentially win the first national championship since friend of the Aaron Torres podcast, Herschel Walker, was at Georgia. By the way, for a Georgia fan that's tuning in for the first time, had Herschel Walker on the show about 2 weeks ago. Got to go back and listen. It was an all-time interview. But when I look at this Georgia team, what I see is, I think, a quarterback that's probably better than people give him credit for, right? This kid Stetson Bennett, everybody will, he was a fifth stringer and he's this and he's that. Well, if you watch the Tennessee game, yes, in some ways he's limited, but he's pretty accurate. He's pretty confident when he drops back, and he's probably a better athlete than we want to give him credit for. Picked up a few nice plays with his feet on the ground, including a touchdown run. And then two, the offensive line is just a monstrosity who basically dominates everybody that they play so far. And I understand that, look, it's going to be different. You're going to have to face challenges along the way. But they handled, all things considered, without one of their better running backs, James Cook, by the way, 193 yards of rushing against a good Tennessee front seven. By the way, really quickly on Tennessee, shout out to the kid, Henry Toe. That guy is a monster, okay? That guy made every tackle yesterday. But when I look at Georgia, I look at a team that I think is good enough to win the national championship. And I think they're really good enough this year. I think there's been other years where they were good enough to make the playoff, to be in that conversation, but I didn't think they had enough once they got there to actually win the 2 games needed to claim the championship. I think last year they would have been a better opponent in the playoff than Oklahoma was, but of course they lost to LSU in the SEC title game and they weren't going to get in. So I think that this year they actually have enough balance, at least as of right now, to do both. Now, I will say, I actually in some ways feel bad for Georgia because this is a heck of a year to get Alabama as the crossover game in the SEC, because if you don't play Alabama, you're almost certainly, your entire season comes down to the Florida game, and you're basically having to win one game to get to the SEC title game undefeated. And even if you lose in the SEC title game, I think in this specific year, you would have a strong argument to make the college football playoff. However, now you have to play Bama in the regular season, and with Bama, that's going to be a tough hill to climb to beat them twice in the regular season, once in Tuscaloosa. Obviously, whether you win or lose, you're still going to have to play them in the SEC championship game if you get there. And so what essentially comes down to for Georgia, I believe, is this, is that when you look at Georgia's schedule, they've already beaten Auburn. They do not play Ole Miss, which I think weirdly is a huge benefit to them. They do not play Texas A&M, and they already played Tennessee. And so basically their entire season comes down to this. Can they win 2 out of 3 games with the Alabama regular season game, the Florida regular season game, and the SEC title game? If they win 2 out of 3, they're going to the playoff. If they win 2 out of 3, they're going to the playoff. They are going to be a really good team, but I believe that this is the best team of the Kirby Smart era. If you remember, I had Clemson over Georgia as my national championship game in the preseason. That probably would have changed if Ohio State was in the mix, but I bring it up to say I think Georgia's really good. I think they showed it, and I think in a sport where fewer and fewer teams play actual defense outside of Clemson, who we're going to get into in a minute, Georgia plays some real defense, and they look really, really, really good. All right.